Trauma is like how long is a piece of string. Depending on the dog as an individual, what can be one dog's trauma might just be a little shock for another dog. So it can vary depending on the dog's functional character, the dog's gender, the actual event, what happened just after the event, the support that the dog got, and also the age of the dog. Whilst no animal should be subject to trauma, if a young animal is exposed to a fright or frightening experiences, that certainly can lead to traumatic incidences, rather than the same experiences occurring in a dog that is an adult. Examples of traumas are really context specific. They depend on the individual. But to give you a few examples, both chronic and acute, they can vary. It might be, for example, a dog that is untouched but lives in a house where there's constant arguing and fighting. The dog isn't able to flee. The dog is able to remove himself from that experience and that environment. Again, from a nervous system perspective, this can build this arousal, but the freeze response may not be able to be activated, so the energy is not able to be discharged, but is stored within the body. It might be a dog, in Tunkasila's case, who is beaten, where again she isn't able to discharge her energy because she is held whilst being beaten. A dog that is having a fearful experience while on a lead can be subject to a similar episode. They are unable to flee, they may not want to react, but they cannot discharge their energy because they are held on the lead. It can be a dog that is unhappy by simply its home life and its exercise is being in a yard. It is cold, it is miserable, it is hungry, it is sad, it is helpless. That can also lead to trauma as well. Another way that trauma can arise within the nervous system is surgery. Now, I don't want you to panic. Many dogs have surgeries and they're absolutely fine. It's just having an awareness of how trauma works and how surgery can possibly and potentially create trauma in the body. When we look at it from a nervous system perspective and we think of trauma, trauma isn't just emotional trauma, it's also physical. So anything that involves a cut, a break, a tear, or incision to the nervous system is trauma to the body. The problem that happens in surgery is that we are anaesthetized, or the dog is anaesthetized, so energy isn't able to be discharged. The nervous system is trying to get the body to do something, to run away, to defend, to just discharge this energy. But we are technically, or the dog is technically in the freeze response because it's on the operating table and able to do anything about it. What can then happen is that when the dog awakens, sometimes a dog can have traumatic issues as a result of surgery. This is the same thing in humans. Because the nervous system has recognized the trauma, but the energy has been unable to discharge. However, what can happen a lot of the time is a way of the body protecting itself is the body naturally wants to discharge the energy. And what the body does is simply starts to shake. By shaking, the energy is being discharged. So often, if our dogs have had surgery and our dogs shake, we feel sorry for them. We want to stop them. We want to stop this shaking. But actually, it's a natural way of the dog's body processing that trauma, processing that physical trauma that has happened during that surgery. And so it's important that we allow that energy to be discharged. So life stage 2 is all about desensitizing correctly. We go from life stage 1 and how we can move around those behaviors that we see in life stage 1, all to do with protection, safety, nurturing qualities. Desensitizing is important, but hopefully you can see just how important it is so that we don't create ecosystem disturbances and distresses and we don't compromise our dog's wellness. Here are some examples of where we can potentially create trauma and certainly create distresses within the dog's ecosystem. Sometimes that arises as a result of over-socializing. In the top example here in this picture, we can see how afraid the puppy is. If we compare that to the other 2 videos that we saw of those 2 young puppies meeting those 2 dogs and how balanced those adult dogs were, how gentle they were, how respectful they were. They were really good positive associations for that dog, really great positive experience for those young dogs. But in this picture, this can run the potential of trauma. We often think trauma is where the dog has been really severely injured, been in a car crash, been in a fight, been bitten by another dog. And that isn't necessarily the case. Because when we think of our dogs as energy systems as well as physical systems, it's the energy system that we have to safeguard. The energy system can change not just from physical contact, but just from a shock, just from a sensation that the dog's body and the dog's sensory system is sending it and giving it information that it feels uncertain. Its survival is compromised. Certainly in this picture, the dog's survival is compromised. The German Shepherd is not making physical contact, but it's too intense, too intrusive, and happening too quickly for that young puppy. And the key thing here as well is that puppy is a young puppy. Anything and everything that a dog sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches, or feels is stored as a memory, is stored as an experience. So it might be that this young dog learns all dogs are scary. All dogs of this breed are scary. All dogs of that gender are scary. All environments similar to this are to be fearful of. All humans that wear those colour trousers are to be fearful of. The list of how these negative experiences and what can create these traumas is extensive and varies from individual to individual. And because it's only going to take one break to create a break, it is something that we really need to avoid, and it is something that we really need to be aware of so that we don't create wellness compromises in our dogs, and we don't create issues where the dog absorbs information that teaches them and tells them of all the different stimuli that are a potential threat. The list really can be endless. A similar example can occur here. This dog really is communicating with its human. For whatever reason, it doesn't want to go forward. Again, the dog is not able to learn in its own time. Certainly the dog is not being listened to because the dog is being dragged. Remember what happens in life stage 2, in that desensitizing stage that Gordon Haber talks about. Pups are encouraged to sniff every rock, smell, butterfly and stick. That is not being encouraged for this dog here. Its Orrington response isn't activated. It's in the stress threat response and it's being dragged. As it is being dragged past stimuli, the dog can absorb this information, again, of anything and everything that it sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches or feels. And it can learn that as it's dragged past them, that all these different objects, stimuli, surroundings, people, animals, anything and everything that's around there is actually negative for that dog. It's not an enjoyable experience, it's not a pleasurable experience. And all that can happen, or what could potentially happen, is that the dog can then start to show negative behaviours, defensive behaviours, fearful behaviours around those objects. If we simply just stop for a moment, understood why does this dog not want to go forward, allow the dog's Orrington response to be activated, then we show the difference and we allow for a difference between a dog whose wellness is compromised in comparison to a dog's wellness that is fed, that is matured, and also provides for a lot of positive learning outcomes. And finally, in this picture here, regardless of whether the dog is a pup or an adult dog, you should now know what this behaviour is. This dog is in that Sphinx position. This dog is really communicating, I don't trust. I don't trust this child. I don't want this child near me. I don't want this child to touch me. Now, what can happen is that the child obviously can be injured. But what can also happen is this dog can learn that children are scary. Children compromise my safety. Children don't make me feel safe. Of course, it's not the child's fault, it's the human's fault for not being the go-between and not setting up the situation and environment that allows for correct desensitizing. It's a huge responsibility coexisting with the dog. It's a huge responsibility of ensuring that we safeguard our dog's wellness. And it's a huge responsibility in understanding and recognizing our dogs as genetically ancient canines that they are. Sometimes it does feel easier to just pick the dog up and walk them past something that they're fearful of. Or really, we just don't have the time to do this correctly. But really, we need to make the time. The dog never asked to live with us. It was our choice. And therefore, it's our responsibility to ensure that we recognize and safeguard our dog's wellness. That we recognise in this very delicate ecosystem and this whole organism. And what we can do, regardless of whether they're a puppy or a rescue dog, to ensure that their survival is not compromised, to ensure that if their survival is compromised, that it's for a mild scare rather than a severe fright or a trauma. Because when we look at the list of those negative experiences and the impact that has on the dog's ecosystem, the impact that has on the dog's wellness, we can see why we want to avoid those experiences. First and foremost, there is a disturbance within the dog's energy system. The flow of that energy system, the natural alignment of that energy system becomes broken. When a dog is in a situation where it's under pressure, where it's not feeling comfortable at that moment in time, it already has an inability to learn. And when we looked within the Canine Wellness Wheel section of the course, we learned that within wellness, having an ability to learn is key to wellness. The immune ecosystem is compromised because of there only being two survival defense mechanisms, one being in the nervous system and one being the digestive system, which I discussed within the Canine Wellness Wheel section of the course. The digestive ecosystem is compromised because where there is an inflammation within the nervous system, it compromises all systems within the ecosystem. Equally, when a dog is stressed, when a dog feels uncertain, often you'll find that digestion is cut off. A dog doesn't want to eat because energy is now moved into the sympathetic nervous system, that part of the nervous system that's all about survival and safety. It burns unnecessary calories, it creates inflammation. It means that we compromise growth for our dog. It means that we compromise nutrition for our dogs. The nervous system obviously becomes compromised. Growth at all levels, not just at a physical level, but growth at a cellular level, regeneration, renewal for our dogs as a whole organism becomes compromised. Pressure is placed on their stress organs. There is a buildup of defense mechanisms such as adrenaline and cortisol that the dog absorbs and learns that when it is presented into a similar or same experience as prior, it has to create this adrenaline. Or equally, it can become sensitive of this. There is a reduced interest in play and interaction. And remember, this can also create disease. Disease is not just physical imbalance, but emotional imbalance. And this is something that I discussed within the Canine Wellness Wheel section of this course, as is the fact of both positive and negative stresses. When the nervous system is under stress, it isn't just about negative stress, but also positive. And that's why within the Canine Wellness Wheel, we have this fine balance of movement and rest. Too much excitement, too much joy, too much hyperarousal, but from positive outcomes, can equally create damage within the nervous system. And that's something we have to be aware of. Now, for example, with my dog that has trauma, what we have done tirelessly over time is a variety of therapies, a variety of learning, and a variety of teaching, which certainly hasn't got rid of the trauma, but what it has done is improved her recovery time. Whereas in the past, it could take her 2 or 3 days to recover, now it can be anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. For me, that is massive, because what I don't want to do is cause further interferences and further disturbances within her ecosystem as a result of those traumas. I'm aware that my dog, as a result of trauma, is a sensitive individual. It just so happens that the age that she received the trauma, the fact that she's a guide as a functional character, the fact that she's a female, have equally not played in her favour, which means that the trauma has been much, much worse for her. The fact that her recovery has now improved over time is great for me. But of course, there is potential and there is great opportunity for dogs that have had really, really deep fears to be able to overcome them in time. But we're talking about time. This can take a long, long time. For some dogs, it might even take a few years. Some dogs, it might even be a few months. But it's all about time. And that's why I love this saying of something that is broken has the potential to be transformed, because of course, our dogs can and do. In order to allow for that, we have to eliminate stresses so that our dog's nervous system has opportunity and time to recover. In order to safeguard our dog's wellness, their environment must include the ability to seek joyful, loving environments that stimulate peace and pleasure. We can bring in a whole range of therapies, which is why the last section focuses on these, under Kachina medicine. Techniques that use vibrational energy that work on the energy systems of our dogs to stabilize them. By working on therapies that work on the energy system and provide for changes at a vibrational level, at a cellular level, allows for changes in energy and to stabilize the dog's wellness and its ecosystem. We do have to have that acceptance and that awareness though, that some dogs simply are unable to overcome those distresses, to overcome those traumas. And how sad is that? That's why I prefer to work with the life stage 1 and the life stage 2, slowly, in the dog's own time, and fairly. Not just in understanding our dogs as the genetically ancient canine that they are, but also understanding our dogs that live in a modern day world where our dogs are a domestic animal, and they have dog-to-dog interactions, but dog-to-human interactions, to ensure that these occur fairly, respectfully, and in harmony, so that we coexist peacefully. When we are working with dogs whose nervous system is compromised, it might be that the dog has had trauma. It might be for that moment in time the dog is very, very fearful. What we have to remember is how we are. We have to remember how the biochemical state in us, the emotional state in us, can be absorbed by our dogs. And that again can exacerbate the experiences and the behavioural responses that our dog is going to show. So how do we know if a dog has had trauma, if a dog has had terror, to the point if it's really affected its biochemistry and how it can cope in interacting with its world or in this modern day world? It's like asking how long is a piece of string, which is why prevention is better than cure. I prefer to have an understanding of what our dogs needs in terms of being a social canine and how we can work with these life stages, rather than setting our dogs up to fail or creating a situation or environment that has now created trauma within a dog's body. But I'm going to give you a success story. I'm going to give you a lovely example about Bruno. Bruno's human guardians came to me with a bit of distress. Bruno is a show dog, and he was very, very good at it. Except when he was of a young age, at 6 months old, he was at a show outdoors on a very windy day. A gazebo hadn't been tied down properly, and a gust of wind got hold of the gazebo, shot it up in the air, and the gazebo landed on top of Bruno. Bruno physically pooed and weed himself and ran away, and a whole load of strangers in that show were trying to grab hold of him and catch him. So this is when we look at experiences that have gone against an animal's survival. They've created experiences of distrust and unease and unsafety for the animal. And how each and every dog would deal with that situation will vary. It'll vary on age, on the dog's gender, on the dog's functional character, etc., etc. But what we did know about Bruno is something that I've already said. He was a young dog. He was only 6 months old. He was still really only in that life stage 2 of desensitizing, where with desensitizing, everything should be done within the dog's own time and to allow a dog to feel safe. It doesn't compromise the dog's safety. Equally, he might have been in a fear stage at that age, being only 6 months old. And also, if a dog has a bad experience when they're young, it is stored harder and faster than the same experience for the same dog if that were to occur at an older age. It also just happened that Bruno is a guide. And what do we know about a guide? If we remember within the functional character section, guides are self-preserving. They can really internalize trauma a lot harder and a lot faster than other functional characters. They don't really expect, like any animal, they don't really expect to be in a situation where there is threat. But given these factors, first and foremost, of Bruno's age and the fact that he's a guide, it's no surprise that he found this experience scary. And in fact, the experience was scary because on top of the gazebo falling on him, then a whole group of strangers were trying to catch him. What that created for Bruno was an adversity, a dislike, a sheer terror of being taken to a show environment again. Whenever he got to a similar environment, he shut down. He cowered, he shook, he growled, he lunged. He started to show these irrational behaviours that tell us this dog is struggling in this environment. The dog is not coping well. And is it fair to place that dog in that experience once again? Now, fortunately, Bruno's human guardians were prepared to never put Bruno in that experience ever again. They just wanted to give it a try. They wanted to have an understanding of how they could support him. But if he didn't feel safe in that environment, then they weren't going to force it. But looking at functional character, having an understanding of trauma, having an understanding of scent, we can put all these things together to see how we can provide safety, security and support for Bruno. So one of the things that I recommended to do was that they got to the show area nice and early. They got to the show area way before anybody turned up. So that the very first thing they were focusing on was simply Bruno's new environment. And what they did was created Life Stage 1. These beautiful maternal, nurturing, safe behaviours. The touch work, the shock points, the breath, the neutral groom, the nurturing food. They're putting everything that Bruno would need and would experience at Life Stage 1. And the only thing that Bruno's body needed to cope with was just the environment, the physical environment before people started to arrive. Now, one of the things that was going against Bruno's favour was who went into the showground with Bruno. To begin with, that was the wife, Sarah. When we look at it from a gender perspective, remember what I talked about in the functional character section. Genders represent different roles and different purposes. So a dog that is not feeling safe in an environment is really going to get more support from a male who does feel confident, because males offer protection, than what a female can. So we also switched that round. We took Sarah out of the show environment and was just on the outskirts next to the fence, and we brought the husband in. Now, what worked really beautifully on top of that was Bruno lived with some other dogs, and one of those dogs was a defender. It was a defender called Bede. And again, naturally being a male and also a natural defender, Bede has the opportunity to provide protection and support for his guide. This is something that's going to provide support and safety for any individual. Now, unfortunately, Bede wasn't able to get into the arena with Bruno, but we set it up so Bede could just stand on the periphery, so Bruno could see and could smell and sense that Bede was near him. And one final thing that we'd explored and discussed was scent. Scent through Bruno's diet. Now, actually, Bruno was on a food source that he should have been on and should be on given his functional character as guide, and also a food source that his body needs in terms of wellness. Bruno is fed raw food, and Bruno quite beautifully was fed chicken wings. The problem that we have in this situation is Bruno was being taken to environments that he didn't feel safe in and was being fed a food source that, in terms of how that animal was killed and how that food can be metabolized, could create extra scent, create Bruno in smelling very pungent. Now, that's not necessarily incorrect or wrong, but the problem that we can have is that a dog who's now being taken to a space, to an environment where they don't feel safe, is not going to want to have this scent be part of them. Is not going to want to have this scent be in their presence. Now, one of the suggestions that I made is that yes, it's important for Bruno to have his raw food. It's important to have an understanding of how this raw food can change the chemical communication, can change the scent in Bruno, and equally how he needs to smell in conjunction and in coexistence with the other dogs in his group composition. However, we also have to have this compromise of how Bruno wants to smell and the scent he wants to leave as information of himself in an environment and in an event where he doesn't feel safe, he no longer feels safe. So I suggested that we change Bruno's raw food to a food source that is more neutral. In terms of how that food is going to be consumed and metabolized, it's going to give off a different smell. And the suggestion I made was to feed tripe, which again, when we look at life stages, if we do have a dog that struggles to eat a couple of days when they first go on holiday, it's again a food source that I recommend quite a lot. So I put in a suggestion that about 4 to 5 days before Bruno is taken to his next show event, that his food source needs to be changed. Because we have this compromise of Bruno needing to be on a food source given his group composition at home, but the fact that his scent is going to affect how vulnerable he feels when being taken to an event and experience when now he's feeling unsafe. By changing the food source about 3 to 4, 4 to 5 days before Bruno went to that event, can be enough change in his body to then make up the difference between how he needs to smell to communicate through scent to his group at home, and how we're going to support him through scent so that he feels safer and calmer when out in that experience that he no longer enjoys, by putting him on the tripe. And this was a great success story. So we understood Bruno in terms of the trauma that had arose. We understood Bruno in terms of the age that he was when that trauma arose, his functional character that played a part, but how we could use all these little pieces, like chess pieces or little jigsaw pieces, where we could bring them together and really support and create resilience for Bruno's wellness. We changed the fact that Sarah, the wife, came out of the arena and we brought the husband in. A male can provide support. It was beautiful the fact that we were able to use Bede as a natural defender to bring support for Bruno as well. Bruno was taken to the environment hours before people started to turn up, so the first thing Bruno's having exposure to is simply the environment itself, that space, and we worked on life stage 1 within that space. Now, through other positive reinforcement and desensitizing, other people were able to come in and Bruno felt safe around them. And the report that I got, even within 7 days of putting this new program in, was this: I can't believe it's the same dog. No skull cap, no herbs, potions or tablets. Just a biscuit 3 nights before a show. So the family decided to offer Bruno biscuits rather than the tripe. Get him in the venue nice and early so he settles. Then when it's his turn, he is straight out in the ring. He is also in the same class as Bede. So they decided to enroll Bede into the same class so Bede could provide support for Bruno. So Sarah's in there with us as well. About everything you told us, I think. Oh, and he still wags away at my touch game to keep him focused on the right times. So from a teaching perspective, again looking at the southern part of the canine wellness wheel, this is where we brought in some teaching. We brought in some positive reinforcement. We brought in some target work and focus work. So that when we put him in a situation where his body feels safe, his body is wanting to digest food. His body is wanting to take treats. That gives us an indication of how safe the dog feels because he wants to eat in the first place, but also uses a distraction game and a focus game so that Bruno can be learning and absorbing information so that he learns that this environment has gone from one of unsafe and uncertain to now one of safety again.